My name is Aaron Marcus. I'm president of Aaron Marcus and Associates in Berkeley, California. We have an exciting group of people and a very exciting topic today to speak about. And there I am from Berkeley, California, and I'm wearing my multicultural hat. Here's Surya Vanka, who is now from? Microsoft. Surya Vanka, yes, from Microsoft. Royce Lee coming up from eCrusade. Slightly different than what is stated there. You can see their entire life history flash before your eyes. Kelly Goto from San Francisco. And Ryan Freitas from Adaptive Path in San Francisco. Each of us has particular insights to offer on the subject of culture, design, business, and technology. Before we get started with some conversation on this subject and questions that we'll invite from you, I want to give you a little pep talk, and I think I have to ask now to switch to this other unnamed platform here. There we go. For a quick review of some concepts, some terminology, etc. I'll try to be very brief. Bill Gates was cited some year or two ago as one of the leading anthropologists of the world. Really? Well, not exactly, but Microsoft has gained some well-deserved fame for hiring many anthropologists and ethnographers to look into home environments, business environments, vehicle environments, mobile environments, to better understand what people do and to view that from a culture point of view, from a culture perspective. Translation of screens from one language into another is nice. It helps sell products in those particular countries, but isn't enough. It's not just a matter of translation. Our technology, as you well know, allows us to move products and services across the world, and the user experience design issues are ever more complex and challenging. What I would like to argue briefly here for is that culture analysis, understanding people's cultures, how they relate to products and services, the differences and the similarities are important to understand. When I talk about these products and services from the web, mobile, vehicle, desktop, etc., we're talking about user interface design in part, and that's including metaphors, mental models, navigation, interaction, and appearance. The basic ideas, the structure of functions, of data, of tasks, roles, and people at work or play or moving through environments, how they navigate through all of that content and controls, the interaction details and appearance aspects. And it's possible to add concerns about culture to every aspect of development, from the initial planning, the strategy, to research, design, implementation, evaluation, documentation, and so on. And all of the tools that we have are affected significantly, even in terms of how do we ask people questions, what kind of questions. We'll talk about that more in a moment. So I want to just show you quickly an example or two from the web and ask, in this case, should every website look like this? Well, it may be great for Daimler Chrysler. There's German Royal Prussian blue in the background. It is in English and German, but it may not fit all cultures, all societies. Several years ago, FedEx and DHL both had websites in which you could ship products to Saudi Arabia. The one on the right showed young men in white shirts and ties, which was more typical of what you would find in Saudi Arabia. At the time, FedEx showed a young Asian woman with her face uncovered and her arms bare. Is that the right thing to show? Richard Gere, you know him, don't you, got into trouble kissing an Indian movie star, I think it was, in India, and now is under the threat of arrest in India for public kissing. It's not just Americans who make mistakes. Here's an example from Arabia Online on the left. one of our clients in the past. Although the website was in English for North Americans and Europeans as users, customers, the layout was in Arabic. The major buttons are on the right. It reads right to left. And look, even these little arrows of red on the left are pointing to the left, not to the right. Some platforms, some applications, environments take account of that by thinking about different languages, being sensitive to political and historical differences. Excuse me. And people are sensitive to these religious, historical, and even aesthetic differences. Some years ago, Toyota introduced a car into China, and it was quite controversial at the time because this site is well known in China. This is the site in which the Japanese last invaded China. Do you think that was a good selection for the photo? I think not. Different countries and cultures have attitudes about what's right, what's sacred, what's appropriate for public display and private display, in room interiors, in fashions, in car selection colors, etc. So why wouldn't this also apply to websites or software and application displays? Even the flags of the world reflect different histories, different nationalities, etc. Many of the predominantly green ones, as you might expect, are influenced by Islam, for example. Cultures have different preferences for color, layout, texture, and pattern. For those of you who've studied that in art history or architecture, you may know something about that. The same thing applies in website, application, web-based applications, etc. There's a need for localization, but what kind of localization? For which kind of people? Business challenges include determining the right number of different versions because you don't have money and time to make every possible difference for all kinds of people. Many researchers have studied the dimensions of culture. One of them is Gerrit Hofstede. I'll introduce his name to you. He wrote a book called Cultures and Organizations. He studied many thousands of IBM employees and developed these patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that are programmed into all of us by the time we're 6 to 7 to 8 years old. We don't look up at our parents and say, "Why are you trying to brainwash me in your culture?" Maybe you did that, but it's kind of unusual if you did. And by the time we grow up, we have attitudes about rituals, symbols, heroes and heroines' values. Whether we shake hands, whether we bow, whether we serve a business card with 2 hands, 1 hand, or just toss it on a desk for the other person to pick up. Hofstede identified 5 dimensions of culture called power distance, collectivism versus individualism, femininity or gender role differences, uncertainty avoidance, and orientation to long-term in time. I don't have enough time, unfortunately, to go into this in detail, but I can make a white paper available to you if you're interested on the topic. For example, there are high power distance countries and low power distance. In high power distance, there's a centralized boss. Subordinates do what they're told, what's expected. In low power distance countries, positions may change. There's shorter hierarchies, etc. And you can design differently applications that are focused on one kind of culture versus another. We looked at the time in Malaysia and the Netherlands, which are different areas of the world. Malaysia has a very high power distance culture and country. Notice this website for university is axially centered. It focuses on the seal of the university in the absolute center of the screen. The pictures of all male potentates of the university and major monuments of the university. Quite different from the Netherlands, which has a much lower power distance rating. Here's an asymmetric layout. Men and women are shown. Are these the leaders of the university? I don't think so. They're students. Once you find different dimensions, you can actually plot the differences for different countries. Hofstede does that in his book, as well as explaining the impact of these culture differences on family, education, excuse me, and work. And aren't you making applications and websites for family, work, or education? Probably so. You may want to take a look at that book. we have done ourselves a study of about 12 different B2B and B2C websites looking at the differences of these corporate standards for each of these companies based on the countries in which they're appearing. And we did find patterns of difference, just, for example, in terms of power distance, for instance. If the Siemens corporate standard said, oh, there better be a little picture of some place that will take you back to the home page, in the Netherlands, it would show a picture of this, I guess, young woman looking out at you straight across. That's a very important culture matter about whether they look down, across, or up. And over at the right from Malaysia, remember that was very high power distance. Once again, male leaders and giant architectural monuments. The same thing we saw on that Malaysian university website. It shows up again in a corporate structure. We even found patterns of similarity in some of these culture differences as you look within a company. We did another study. Hofstede is one example of theories about culture. There are many others. We looked at 9 theories and found 29 different dimensions of culture. We sent these out to 60 experts around the world, did a popularity contest for which ones most of the experts thought were best, and they aren't the same ones that I showed you earlier. Context, technology development, how advanced the culture is, uncertainty avoidance, time perception, and authority perception, which is like power distance. And again, you can look at countries and cultures and figure out the best combination of things. In addition, these dimensions of culture need to be related to dimensions which have been studied of persuasion, trust, intelligence, personality, and even cognition. There's a book called The Geography of Thought by Nisbet, which says basically, you know, Asian culture and people think differently than European and North American people. Have you noticed? It is controversial, but he does posit the reasons for this difference. There are bodies of knowledge about this topic. In addition to these bodies of knowledge, which we're going to hear from in just a minute, there is an organization, lisa.org, in Geneva, which publishes a primer on localization. There's the AIGA Center for Cross-Cultural Design. If you do a search on cross-culture and design, search engines will pop up this particular location. Anthropology associations have information as well, and there's a SIGCHI intercultural website. So there are sources of information for figuring out what are these culture differences, how can we understand them, how can we use the techniques to design better to bring better products and services to the end user and the user experience. Now, with that as a basis, we're going to have a quick introduction by each person about their particular background, I think a kind of a user profile, so to speak, of each person. Then we'll get to a couple of basic questions, and we'll move on to audience questions as well as to what do you do about all this? Now what? So let's start in the first place with Surya. And each of you should be mic'd and able to speak up.
Hello, folks. My name is Surya Vanka, and I'm at Microsoft. And my role at Microsoft is I oversee user experience, best practices, and standards across the company, and do this globally. And I'm here partly wearing 2 hats. One hat is I'm the only one on the panel here who's actually working in corporate, so that's one hat I'm wearing. So I'll kind of talk through that lens. And the other hat I'm wearing is, in a previous life, I was a researcher at a university and a professor at a university, and I did a lot of research on cross-cultural design, particularly focusing on the meanings of color in different cultures, and over several years compiled a compendium which captures different meanings of colors in 43 different cultures, part of which is now on the web. And glad to have you here.
Hello, I'm I'm Royce, and I'm from MIX07. We are a F&A reservation company in Shanghai and Hong Kong. Maybe we can share a bit of some of our findings and share some of our insight, if you're allowed to do on China. Just a very short one, I think will be fine. Okay, great. Okay, the first thing is that the first lesson that I had is my boss told me like 10 years ago how to properly hand a name card. So that is the way that I do, and I was told that was wrong. So I will tell you what's wrong with it after my presentation. It's a very short one. So that's about MIX07. And quickly, I would like to ask a question: is how many of you know which are the top websites in China? Baidu is, and the other portal is Sohu and Sina. In terms of usability, you have no idea why this site goes so high traffic. Everyone goes to the website, and it will get like 10 of millions pages every day. So we're quite interested to know why people in China like that kind of design. We actually go to different cities and ask them. The answer is they don't feel that design is physically attractive, but they like it. The reason why is that people in China, they rely a lot on internet. Internet is a very important source of information. They trust internet more than they trust the TV or newspaper, because these media are more controlled. So they rely on media, and that they really want to get most information out of the internet. So by putting many information into the website, it means that they can look at it and they get the information as much as they can. And the broadband penetration nowadays in China is very low. It's like 5%. So to maximize one page load is very important. This is another website. And another characteristic is that there are many pop-ups. And China people like pop-ups. And you want to know why? Because, again, the broadband is so low, the penetration. People avoid to go back to the previous page and then to load all over again. So they prefer pop-up, and they will open like a servo of the windows and then wait and then go back afterwards. So it's not really about the physically attractive or not. It's about the functionality in China. And there are another interesting about the design in China, that you will see some of the design that will have some English. Some will just have plain Chinese. We have a very hot debate in our company whether we use English in China. The answer is quite mixed. We feel that in cities like Hong Kong, in Shanghai, adding English meaning that you are very aspirational, very modernized. That's very good. But in other cities, people are really scared of by a single use of English. So again, that is another thing that we may want to consider when we're doing a web project in China. Well, very briefly, what's wrong with this? Well, the difference between the correct and the wrong way is you facing your name to the audience versus you facing your name towards yourself. The right way is facing the name to your audience. So that's the way we do it in China. Thanks.
Can you hear me? My name is Kelly Goto, and I am a fourth-generation Japanese American, which means my grandparents were born here, and the only thing I can really say in Japanese is Nihongo wa kaimasen, which means I don't understand Japanese. So I'm representing the American here, actually. I call myself a design ethnographer very carefully. I actually have been changing that into an evangelist for design ethnography. I chose the term about 5 years ago because I thought it was kind of snappy, and I thought of myself as a hybrid between the design and the research worlds. And so I really like that term, but I've been kind of hosed by the academic community lately, so I'm being careful these days. But what I really do is I have a company called GoToMedia, and it's in San Francisco, and we specialize in people-friendly interfaces and some cross-cultural design, but where my second passion lies is in GoToMobile. And that's my personal website. And for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been investigating trends and a lot of what's going on in the world around and starting up networks, research networks around the globe, and opened an office in Barcelona, and have really tried to understand what's happening around the world and how it's going to affect our clients and customers and the people that use the services that we produce every day.
And that's my introduction. My name is Ryan Freitas. I'm from Adaptive Path. We are a small consultancy in San Francisco, Bay Area. We work primarily with clients that are doing user experience projects. I am more on the product and web application side of doing things. I am a maker. I'm a designer, interaction designer, pretty much former engineer, coder, kind of all the way down to kind of product strategy these days. I am actually kind of in the same vein as Kelly, working with clients in order to get them to be able to express their ideas as best as they can to as wide of an audience as possible. That can mean international projects. I've worked in Tokyo, I've worked in Scandinavia, I've worked in Britain, I've worked in Germany for a while. Every single one of these audiences requires something different. What I try to bring to each one of my clients is an idea for nailing down the core of a product's offering so you can make it work regardless of what the messaging around it is. We've got a really good group today, so I'm hoping we get a little bit more conversation going. So good stuff.
So, thank you for the quick intros. One of the ways that we wanted to get our conversation started is to ask, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from your experience analyzing, researching, or designing for different cultures? Anyone want to start?
Last time, I'll see if anyone. Okay, I'll go. So I'll speak to this from my perspective as working in a large company, and sort of the product development process, which is obviously not one which is only won by designers or only by developers, but by entire teams, right? And in the case of Microsoft, 70,000 person company with about 30,000 engineers, right? Shipping about 4 products a week, right? So the scale is very big, but traditionally Microsoft's also been a company that's been mostly in the northwest of the US, right? It's a very Redmond-centric company, and that has changed over time. So it brings a lot of challenges when when markets change, and then there's a lot of growth that's actually outside the country, and yet we've got a lot of the knowledge that's resident within one particular geography. So it's been a major cultural change over the past few years to really bring in ways of not thinking in US-centric or even Pacific Northwest-centric ways, right? Or, the sort of subculture of software development. And I think some of the valuable things that I've learned as I've sort of sometimes led and sometimes followed the rest of the company in this process is really, how do you make the real experience of people who are unlike yourselves come alive? Mm-hmm. And how do you bring that into development teams in a rich way so it's not merely metrics, business data, but actually bring it alive? So, there's a ton of methods that we've used. Some may be familiar, some are, just making sure that we adopt not methods that came from technology, but came from the social sciences that have the expertise in how to stand in the shoes of others, how to see the world through the user's eyes, and actually be able to scale that. So there's a ton of little interventions that we have, such as people going out into the field, actually living in context with folks and then blogging extensively and making those blogs available to software development teams, because obviously entire teams can't go out into the field because of resource constraints. So one is really the whole idea of bringing the person alive within the whole development process and making a tight loop between the people developing the product and the people using the product. And technology is awfully useful in building those kind of customer connection loops.
Yeah.
That's one of the major things that I think I've learned. And I think the other major thing I'd say to support that, is, in a technology company like Microsoft, there is also the way we've built the platform has all kinds of assumptions, right? And it's understanding that you build a platform to make products that are global ready, right? So that the bar to actually creating variation is not so high. It becomes very simple to be able to accommodate for variance in a very easy way. And those are probably the two big learnings that I can cite right away about how software development in a large company.
I was just going to comment, I mean, definitely getting out of our user-centric mentality is...
Are the mics all
Can you
on
hear me?
now?
Can you hear me? Okay. Getting out of user-centered, America, and just understanding there's a different context out there. It's really the biggest thing. We recently had a client in Japan, and I told the story this morning, so if you heard it. But basically, it was a Seiko Epson Japan kind of, they said, hey, we're going to do some testing in America. And we said, cool, we'll do the testing. That's great, but why America when you guys have products and services all over the world? And they said, well, you guys are the lowest common denominator. Because if you can use it, anyone can use it, because you guys, return things after 2 years, you don't read the instructions, things like that. So we get used to disposable products and not really, bringing things back if we want to. And there's a whole different culture out there. And I think that the biggest insight that I've gotten over the past several years is just because something's big in Japan or it's big in South Korea, and I'm talking about the mobile space in particular, doesn't mean that it's going to automatically be successful here in the U.S. As we get more into lifestyle and understanding how products and services fit into our lifestyles and what that means, we have to understand at a deeper level what the context is, how people integrate it into their cultures, what their lives are actually like, which means more ethnographic-based studies and audience insight studies and things like that, to understand that trends aren't going to be universally transposed from one culture to the next. What are the deep-seated reasons why something's successful? Even technical infrastructure, government, and all other kinds of things come into play. So people just think something's going to be big, and it's not necessarily that relevant because of cultural changes in this country.
And a lot of the work goes around kind of uprooting assumptions, getting in there with the team and, well, from a client kind of service provider kind of perspective, getting in and helping a client team understand what those assumptions are about their audience. I mean, everyone has, a little bit of marketing segmentation figured out, and maybe they've done some personas, and maybe they've done a little research. One of the exercises we use at Adaptive Path with our clients is getting our clients to tell stories about their users and the way the products integrate into their lives. Getting people to really, on the people who are engineers, people who are designing the way a product works, getting them to talk about how the behaviors that their users engage in function alongside these products and the way that the product dissolves into the behavior that these people are used to every day. That storytelling can unearth any number of assumptions. I worked with Places in Germany recently, in Berlin, and we were talking. It's a multi-channel product. It's available online. It's available through a mobile browser. It's also available through SMS. We were talking about how people make those initial introductions over SMS or however you bring in someone to a system, and they were talking about, in the American market, people will just send you their V card, and I was like, it doesn't really work like that. I mean, the geeks use V card. Your average consumer, not a whole lot of V card penetration so far with mobile device design. That was a kind of assumption on their part. It wasn't going to go forward. We had to work around it. There are other ways to get at those assumptions, but storytelling is a wonderful way to do it.
And that gets past demographics into psychographics and then behavioral.
Exactly.
And that's really where we're trying to go to.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe I can share some of like a more concrete, more like a practical experience, which is quite interesting to us. We've done our usability test actually for our client, the Hong Kong Tourism Board, that target to all the overseas visitors. So we do it in the airport, in Hong Kong airport, And we have people coming from the States and people coming from the Korea and Japan. The normal section of our usability test is lasts for 30 minutes. We found a particular group that will need 1 hour to complete the task. That is the group from mainland China. And we felt so interesting. Why the mainland Chinese will need that particular, like a double of the time they need to do the usability. And later we find out something very interesting is that when we do usability and we tell people you try to evaluate the site, there's nothing wrong with you but the site, so let us know what you think. But to Chinese people, every question to them is like a challenge to themselves. So that when you ask them to do a task, they actually take it literally is challenge for themselves. So they will try very hard to prove to you they can make it. So the successful rate, like for the mainland Chinese people, is like 30% higher than the rest of the group, and they consume like a double of the time. So it's not really a very accurate, way to evaluate the usability using the ordinary way we do for the Western culture. But more, I think we should step back and to observe how they really do the normal browsing.
So do you find more value in like follow-alongs and like true ethnography work as opposed to closed studies?
Right.
Well,
right.
the ethnographers and usability people have noted that there are a set of different techniques, and you really have to use multiple sets of these in different ways for different cultures to get the best results of even storytelling.
Exactly.
Right.
Agreed.
And I think one of the things we were talking about is in our doing studies in China, we've recognized that each area is very different, and you were telling us that people tend to think about China as a whole when it's really broken apart.
Right.
And every culture within that is completely different.
It is.
So that was a big finding, which part of China to test in, not just test in China as a whole.
Right. I think the easy way for you to try that is you go to China and you try different food.
Yes,
the food
exactly.
reflects
Right.
the thinking and the culture.
truth.
It's so different, I tell you.
And the language.
And the language, yes,
Yes.
of course.
Most people think of, I would be surprised to know that I believe people in Beijing tend to eat food with bread rather than noodles.
Right.
Or rice.
Or rice,
I think
yeah.
speaking to the triangulation of different methods, we found it interesting. You probably heard about the whole idea of see, do, and make, right? You uncover your understanding of your users through a triangulation of what people say, what they do, and what they make. But it's interesting that, that's again a model that's emerged in the U.S. because it presumes that people will say, right? People's sort of inhibition to say is probably a little bit lower in North America. In other places, you become stronger in the do or in the make, right? So even the triangulation is different, and the kind of weight that different methods bring data is different.
Actually, we're trying to present the case for culture, the ROI, for the business value of developing products and services, and I think even Hofstede and others comment that almost all business methods and business philosophy is the Harvard Business School's approach. It's Western, North American, and there have been some people in Asia and in the Muslim world who have said, wait a minute, we have our own studies of business, of organization, of society. We really should be looking at our own sources and developing concepts which then design, culture, etc. technology would relate to in quite a different way than it does if you're just focusing on the Harvard Business Review as the essence of true knowledge.
And getting back to the triangulation, it just was interesting. We were saying about multiple methods. One of the things that we've realized over time is it's great to think ethnographic, but we have to be very careful about that term. A lot of companies are using it incorrectly. The idea behind it is understanding and observing, not having pre-assumptions, and actually doing this over a long period of time, the minimum of which would be 2 years. So what we're doing is a week or 2 weeks of 1 day following someone, 3 days of photo diaries, 1 day follow-up. It's really not true ethnography at all, but a lot of companies say it is. So we have to be careful about the term. and it's contextual is what it is, in their context, and also you get more relevance results over time. And I've seen a lot of reports by people who have done these contextual research or somewhat ethnographic, and you can't tell whether the insights are based on these people's personalities and their independent attributes versus a collective. And so one of the things that we've done is combine methods of getting statistically significant information with a certain sampling, of course, and then combining it with contextual or in-person research to verify some of these findings. And so in that way we can try and either say, here's a trend that we see, let's go and observe and ask questions and see if these things are a personal thing or if they're more applicable to as a whole. And I've gotten into trouble for that also because I'm not holistically doing just usability testing, for instance, or things like that. But it really helps to see these larger trends based on surveys, or M-Metrics does some great things with 33,000 people at a time.
I think I'm the heretic on the panel because I take a very suspicious view almost of all research that's presented in front of me. Not having come from a research background, having been in organizations that tried to bring it in and didn't do a particularly good job of it, my initial assumption is that it's one of those, it's like what you're talking about, it's a 2-week follow along and a lot of assumptions baked in, and you have to kind of hold it askance and kind of look at it and make certain that it fits the user and the audience that's trying to be appealed to, as opposed to the presuppositions and assumptions on the part of the organization.
Right.
I mean, one of the things I'm known for saying, I actually said this a couple weeks ago in London, is that most organizations' user segmentation is literally just their marketing segmentation with headshots. Like there's so many bad examples of these things out there. As a designer, you want to take these things into account because they are the best way to inform yourself to the audience you're trying to hit.
Well, people are trying to get findings.
Exactly.
And sometimes they actually can't. So we may do a full ethnographic study in 3 different countries with 30 people, and we're putting Post-its up and having these long conversations, and we don't have findings. And it's really frustrating because we've been paid to do this research, but the thing about ethnography as a theme...
You mean real ethnography?
True stuff.
Mixed. Let's say it's mixed in that there's longer observation, things like that, is that sometimes you don't come up with the results you want to because you're supposed to not presuppose something's going to happen. So then companies scramble to put something together because they paid you.
And it's that scramble that's the problem, because regardless of having findings, you're more informed about your audience having done it. And if you do it in the proper fashion, you actually have what you need to move forward. If you can't turn it into a bulletized list, that doesn't mean you don't know your audience.
Or if they don't want to hear it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh,
if they don't want to hear it, it's like, nope, that's sorry, they didn't find that out. And
exactly.
like, well, I guess we didn't.
Which,
that happens a lot.
that's part of the gig.
We're consultants.
From all of these, granted that they may not be pure and academic and rigorous as one could be under different circumstances, do you think that has anything universal emerged in these studies?
Totally.
Yeah,
Utility. Utility is the only universal. If you can break a product down to its core principle, and you remove all barriers or as many barriers to entry as you can, and it immediately provides value, that is the only universal I've ever found. If a product or a service or something that is trying to inform does not get in the way of people using it, there's 2 pieces of utility. There's the perception of utility. I approach something for the first time and I know immediately how it appeals to me. What about it says what it can do and how it actually will fit in with the way I want to use it. And secondly, it's the response. It's how does it work in my hand, on the screen, however I'm engaging with it. And does that utility come across in my first usage? With as few, is it a pain in the ass to sign up? Does something really get in my way of actually using it? Nothing else that I've found is as good as utility, which is why I have a lot of clients that can't afford some of the upfront research, that can't do it in as many markets as they wish. So they're not sure about how they should message some of these things. What I try to recommend to them is just to figure out how to nail the offering and make it as apparent as possible that this thing has value to people.
But does that mean a less is more approach?
I'm not going to get 37 signals up on here, but I will say that I do believe in simplification. I do believe getting people to understand what you're trying to provide to them without a lot of flashbang whatever up front.
The counter opinion on this is the observation that in some cultures, if people see literally only 3 buttons, and in the other product they see 14 buttons,
Yes.
they think, ooh, I'm getting more for my money. And they will, in fact, gravitate, perhaps erroneously, in the long term. But there are differences between, you know, first impressions, the buyer versus the long-term user, the novice versus the intermediate or expert, and those factors also, I think, have to be taken into account.
Completely agree.
So I agree and I disagree.
Good.
I agree with you because, yes, finally it is the utility. Can I actually use this offering to do something meaningful in my life, right? You know, be it a home product, be it a enterprise product, is it utility? But at the same time, there is, obviously in the global world, there is need for some variance because of local differences. I'm going to reflect on this question at a different level, more at the sort of the surface level, not so much the deeper level of, you know, the practice, but more looking at it from one of the surface attributes, which is color, because that's a question I get asked a lot, having done some research in color previously at Microsoft. Very often I'll get this email from somebody saying, okay, there's this product that we're going out and, you know, X number of countries and markets with, you know, and here is how we're branding it, and here's the colors that we're going after, right? And because of the research, is it okay, either from a defensive point of view or from in terms of really making an impact, you know, and how do we go with it? Can we go with a single offering of colors across all of these cultures, and is that going to be okay? And usually the answer is, you know, it depends. It depends on a lot of things, but there is a lot of variation, and there is no single universal. But then how do you deal with this? Because you are, after all, going after a market that's not homogeneous, but you do want to make an offering. I go back to the idea that, you know, if we're looking for universals, we'll have to sort of dig down a level below to look at, you know, not universals in the surface structure, but what's the deeper structure, right? And build something. So in the case of color, there is universals, but it's not like, what does red mean? Does red mean the same thing in Nigeria and Korea? No, it doesn't. And it could often mean very different things. But then there's a way that you can think through it, because there is, you know, based on research that some ethnographers did a while ago, really good research, folks called Berlin and Kay. There is actually a very systematic set of ways that colors get named in cultures, and there's no more than 11 basic color terms, right? And there's the deep structure. If you can hook into the deep structure, and tying back to what I talked about the platform, right? When you hook into that, there is universality. So you can make changes at the surface, but you hope to know that whatever product you're doing needs to consider that there are maybe about a dozen different primary meanings that tend to get attached to color, right? And similarly, I think when it comes to utility, it's really digging behind to find out what is that sort of, what is that deep structure of utility, and then what is the variation locally. Right? So that's why I disagree and I agree.
That's entirely.
Yeah.
No. Actually, you were talking about color, and I was actually since one of the themes that keeps coming up with the way products are being designed right now is humor. I was curious if humor if there are any universals in humor or play, which seems to keep coming up over and over again.
Are you saying something about the universality of humor?
Well, I mean, I've seen so many bad attempts at humor.
I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
No.
I'm waiting to pounce.
Is there a universality of humor or play in product design?
Because there was a front page article in the New York Times within a month or two ago about the problems of exporting humor, like the, pardon me for mentioning it, but the Apple Macintosh ads that have to be completely reconfigured in Japan because they just don't get the humor. Or Seinfeld is not funny in Germany, but it is in other countries. And people trying to ship their content out, or the BBC trying to bring content into America, have noticed that things significantly change because people's attitudes about what is funny, what are the appropriate times to be funny, etc., are all very nuanced within different cultures. I was going to ask Royce or Kelly if there are any universals that they've observed.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say really quick, try playing Pictionary with a group of people from all over the world. It's pretty interesting because one of the words was castle, and they were like drawing the Taj Mahal, going, this is, a castle, and it was really interesting culturally playing Pictionary just with a bunch of people from different countries. One universal thing is that I don't think any particular country or culture understands the youth generation. And the youth generation is one of the burgeoning, most highly profitable, exciting groups to try and tap into. And we've been working with company after company after company that's trying to understand why MySpace is so popular and what's happening with all the music and sharing. And they could have 100 buttons on a page and they don't care. They could use any color, they don't care. It's frenetic, they're early to adopt, they don't need simplicity. I mean, it's just like foreign to all of us. So if there's a universality to a subsection of the target audiences that we're going after lately, it's the youth generation. And I've been doing a lot of attempting at least to do a lot of research into the youth generation and understand how that works. And so I think that that's sort of universal right now, is that there's a lot of potential from a revenue standpoint.
Yeah.
But people don't get this audience, and it's completely different from anything that we've set up from a patterning perspective or from a usability perspective or anything, yet it's the most sought after right now.
There are ancient Egyptian papyruses in which the writer is complaining about the younger generation and that they don't get any respect from the younger generation. So maybe that is historically some universal
The
trend.
kids are all right.
Yeah, and I think one other aspect to that, if I can just add to that really quickly, is addiction versus ritual. And I think that a lot of addictive
ritual.
behavior versus ritualistic behavior. And I think universally we can figure out rituals that we can apply in context to different cultures at different times, such as drinking coffee in the morning, or we can quickly ascertain what those things are and begin to design products and services that fit into the rituals of their lives. While addiction, many companies are again going after addiction, same youth generation kind of concept, but that is a very difficult thing to define, except for in the adult content market, of course, and sports.
I was just at
Video
a
especially.
conference called Persuasive 2007, which was focused on persuasive technologies and circumstances which are trying to counter some of our typical addictions that lead to obesity or to smoking or et cetera. And there are studies in psychology and behavior theory that to some extent one might say are somewhat wired into our bodies.
Right.
To that extent.
So people want to tap into that from a revenue perspective, of course, and we're having a harder time figuring out the addiction, and then we're able to figure out habitual
And
behavior.
the ethical attitudes towards that are not universally shared.
It's interesting too because if anyone's got a Wii, if you play for any length of time, the Wii will recommend to you that why don't you go outside, like stop playing for a little while. And it's one of those things where it's obviously it's a platform where addiction doesn't matter from their perspective. They know you're going to keep playing games. You've already bought the system. But it's I think an almost a humanistic touch, and I'm curious. I don't even know if that's a part of the Japanese version of the system or not. Probably.
One of the questions going back maybe to Surya's initial comments about Microsoft is how do you get started in moving people forward within a business or an organization to pay attention to culture? And it's one thing if you're a very large organization like Microsoft and reasonably well funded, and it's another thing if you're a startup or a smaller business that may not be able to pay so much or do so much. In fact, some of you have commented about smaller scale operations. So is there an El Cheapo Quico way of getting started versus the larger corporate way of getting started? Or what has been some of your experience?
Well, I mean, we were talking about this at lunch, and I mean, short and quick, rapid ethnography is what we've been calling it, but we're also calling them user insight studies. And while they are not comprehensive, they allow for a quick take culturally, maybe 3 countries at once. Maybe in the U.S. you might have 2 or 3 cities in one shot. These studies can be done in a week, and instead of marketers or new businesses taking thousands of dollars to buy reports that are a year or 2 old and trying to read these and glean little insights from them, at times they can take that budget and do a quick insight study in 2 or 3 countries or 2 or 3 cities to gather the thoughts that those people have right then and there. And I think that when we describe the value of that, we show them why it's relevant, how much it will cost, and and they can make decisions just the same as they would. They want as much information as possible, especially during R&D and things like that. That they are able to actually get there, but we generally spend a lot of time and don't make as much money on those because the budgets aren't there yet to fully subsidize this type of research.
We did a quick study for a major credit card company, the name of which I am not supposed to mention, which they didn't want to pay to send us to 11 different countries. So we just did a study in the Bay Area of people who had recently come from those 11 different countries. We were able to discover in interviews and studying these people that the structure of the subsite that we were looking at and the imagery and the terminology were not only slightly dysfunctional and somewhat alienating, but actually made a significant number of the people angry. Now, is that the kind of result you want from the good user experience of your design? I don't think so. And that was a very significant finding, to bind together these emotional reactions from a number of different people from a number of different countries in relation to just the images that were shown, or you could say also colors or structure or ease of navigation, etc. All of these could have that kind of effect. So the payoff or the results were quite significant. The amount of time and money spent to gain that insight was not so great, and we hoped and felt that it was a stepping stone in getting that particular client to pay more attention to the issues of culture, considering that they're rather well known around the world. We have been talking and giving our opinions about things. I want to make sure that if you have questions that come out of your own experience or issues that have arisen, that you have a chance to ask the panel of experts for some insight. Otherwise, we have questions here to feed them.
It would be interesting to know also from an audience perspective here, how many people are actually engaging in products or services that are primarily in different countries outside of the U.S.?
Okay.
That's great. And how many are not primarily, but also engaging product services that are outside the U.S.? And so I mean, we'd love to hear challenges that you've been facing.
If you could, we have one mic that presumably is working, and if you could quickly identify yourself and ask away, otherwise we'll repeat the question so that everyone can hear it. There were some people here. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm actually working on a startup website right now, and we would hope that the product and service would be international in scope. And my question is there kind of a universal color palette that's non-offensive? Like, for example,
non-offensive color palette.
Say like greens, different shades of greens, and maybe kind of like a leafy kind of theme. Would that be something that would be appealing pretty much everywhere?
Actually, I don't know if you were in the room when we talked about this a little bit, and the answer that I gave, it really depends. It depends a lot, and I know that's a kind of hedge of an answer, but it depends on a few things. It depends on what the culture you're targeting, right? If it is a product, for example, we find, there's some products, say, it's aimed only through a subculture of male administrators, right? It's not a consumer product, right? These people live probably more in a culture of servers and administering mail, a more global culture, rather than a home product, which tends to have a lot of variation from culture to culture, and sensitivities are more, right? So it depends a lot on what culture you target. So it's not only the geography, but also the product category. And having identified that, then you know how critical it is, how critical a role color plays. And if you know that you're going into an area like, fashion or shoes or, something that's sensitive, then definitely there's a lot of variation. The color green in particular is one of the colors that has extremely high variance across. I mean, it has from extremely positive connotations in some cultures to very, very taboo connotations in different cultures. Some of them are very unexpected. And also the color green plays a lot in pairs. When it's paired with different colors, the meaning of green can shift quite dramatically. one resource that's available. It's called the International Color Standards Guide. Happens to be something that I've got on the web, and you find it on colorconnection.com, and it lists the meanings of green.
What's
about
one bad pairing?
That's right.
No, give us one example of a bad pairing of green and orange.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I know green. So green in a traditional bad pairing in China, right, with a white had a meaning of infidelity, right? So you probably, if you're in the wedding dress business, right,
Yeah,
you may not want to have something that's a green and white dress, right?
So, but green with like leafy kind
On
of
the-
background. I mean, when would people find like trees offensive? I mean,
On the other side of all this, there's the non-offensive, and then there's actually having a personality in your product. And if you from a consultative perspective, this might be totally irresponsible. But if you're trying to make a non-offensive design,
You're not going to
succeed. What you need is you need to be able to project yourself, and it might be you might not have success in every market, but you need to be able to represent yourself appropriately.
You know, one of the places, but getting back to green, I mean, this is an excellent point about, how much of the choices that you make only about risk and being defensive, and how much are they about opportunity?
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
But then there are some of the very large risks that you do need to be aware of. For example, green is a very sacred color in most of the Middle East, right? In most Islamic cultures, green is a very sacred color. There's also associations with where you wouldn't, for example, if you're doing a footwear product, you probably would not do it in green, right? Because you wouldn't have green on the soles of your feet because there would be an association. It may not be something that you get sued for, but it's going to be something where people, when they're making a choice of one pair of sneakers or they wouldn't do that because that's green, touching the earth in a way that's not or touching the feet, right? So there is, of course, which is why there's so much of a judgment call in this, and you have to know sort of your big risks, right? And then make those judgment calls about where you want to project your personality as well.
Right.
There are sources of information. There are guidelines or guidebooks that have that can help you make choices, as well as experts who have the experience of doing those kind of color selections. It's great that you're posing the question and thinking about it.
okay, well, thank you very much.
If you to easily get to the site, so you don't need to remember a long URL, you can just search my name and color, and that'll be in most
spell.
search engines. And my last name is Vanka, V-A-N-K-A.
Okay.
Color, and you'll find that.
And
Thank you.
Anyone else, please step forward or form a line. Thank you.
Hi, hello. It will be a question more directed to Microsoft.
You want to identify?
Yes, of course. I'm David Haché, former employee of Microsoft. So I know quite a lot of studies were made in terms of ethnographics and anthropologists with Ankira from. So it's a fantastic set of assets to work with. Problem is that at the end of the day, you deliver a one-size-fits-all product. And I really wonder why there's not like when you install the Windows or whatever, like, are you more a woman or a man? Are you more like that age or that age? And then are you heavy users of your computer? What do you use your computer for? And so on and so on. So kind of dialogue that you started with. And then afterwards you get actually the perfect fit for your experience, user experience. Could be the same with websites, actually. And I really wonder why, because technologically it's really feasible, and why you don't deliver that.
Go ahead.
Hi, David.
Is it clear?
Actually, I'm good. If I hear your question right, I hear it more about personalization and customization rather than necessarily, which is an aspect of personalizing, customizing to cultures, but I hear your question more about the individual level. Is that true?
There's kind of, it's personalization, of course, but it's also, it could be based on your region and whatever, but we know that's a word, Microsoft Word. It's used maybe 10% or 5% of its potential. So why would I need the other 95%? And why would I pay for the 95% as a consumer? So it's a bit personalization, but taking into account all the anthropologic work that was done. And these studies actually made into households with people actually are made with the existing product.
Sure.
So.
I have speculated that eventually we will have enough knowledge to create culture bases. We already can say I prefer to see all this website in English rather than Japanese or Chinese because I can easily take it in and it fits me and all of the people in North America in general more easily. But in some cases, there isn't yet enough knowledge to be able to make those patterns semi-automatically. But remember, there was a time when Adobe didn't have its automatic safe color selector in the menu set. And now we do. In the old days, we had to go carefully hand craft that, and now it's just a quick menu selection. So perhaps in the future, we ourselves might be able to check some general preferences, or it would be known naturally from where we're signing in from about what might be appropriate for that kind of group of people. And if it isn't, we could customize it further.
Well,
And if I may add to that, I don't know if you're familiar with the versions of Windows, for example, like the Starter Edition versions. So Windows actually is quite varied based on some of that research, right? So, for example, the paper, your subscription model Windows, which is in parts of India, and the Starter Edition that's in Thailand. So those are actually very, very customized, and those actually do come from the kind of research from ethnographers, which were, some of that work was about the artifact Windows, but some was just about the practices that users actually have without actually having a piece of software, right, and meeting it. So in fact, some of those things which are not even called Windows anymore in some ways, right, are actually an outcome of the work. But I think we're still in a maturation cycle where we're fairly early, right? Another instance is really, there's the last version of Windows XP, right? I think it came probably in 20 languages. It was under 20 languages. And part of, again, the research that's come back from all the ethnographic work is Vista is available in 130 languages, right? So it's a big change. And part of those changes, so the ethnographic work is not just driving sort of at the surface UI level, but it's driving the platform and the implementation so that now there's something called language interface packs, which actually allow a language like Hawaiian, right, and very languages with less than 100,000 speakers to allow versions of the product to be created very inexpensively. So there, we're actually seeing the impact. This didn't come from sort of a logical extension of technology, right? In fact, it's kind of hard to implement that and to implement a platform that scales up and down and actually allows community to build in and localize products very cheaply. So in some sense, we're along the journey, but we're part of the journey where we're seeing social sciences and the research of customers and people and the lives of people actually start to implement the technology and the platform in very different ways. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so we might see one day like 1 billion different versions of Office.
You could, in fact, you could argue that it's not 1 billion different versions, but the new version of Office with the ribbon, right, with the ribbon UI. And I may be going a little bit off track here because we're going off. But the intention of the ribbon, right, which is the entire new user interface paradigm, is really to get at a problem in previous versions of Office, right, where it had so much capability, right, but people are using only about 5 or 6% of the capability. Of course, it's a different 5 or 6% that everyone uses. So it's a complex problem. But the idea of making this really $10 billion bet to change the user interface, right, to something that is reducing that complexity and reduce the functionality, so it's customized more towards sort of personas or individuals, also plays into the cultural aspect.
And also having too many choices is overwhelming, and so you want to get to having too many choices, and there's just short, anecdote, good experience, or they did a study, maybe this was 10, 12 years ago, with Dell, or maybe it was Gateway Computers when they first came out, and they offered customization, all kinds of ways you can upgrade and get your computer this way, your monitor that way, and your hard drive and all this. And sales were just flat because we weren't ready. We needed simplicity. And so what Good Experience came in did, they did all these studies and everything, and they recommended a small box and a medium-sized box and a large box, and their sales went up 400% in the first quarter. So people don't necessarily want choices. Now, some of it can happen inherently, and it is. That's what Amazon's trying to do, right, is listen to what you're doing. But tracking that behavior, sometimes it's a usability issue and a simplicity issue, and also it's a mental model issue. People want to go from one version to the next, use it on multiple computers. So your question's a very valid one, but it's also got so many little nuances that it's better to keep things simple and try and make an offering universally, and then allow people culturally, I guess, or through segmentation to alter it at will.
There is a project called the Wukong project that was done as an R&D project by Sony Ericsson in 2002 for PDAs that were designed for China, involving a Chinese anthropologist, and all of the work was done in Chinese. And then they were tested in Shanghai or somewhere in comparison to PDAs that were coming from North America, Europe, Japan, etc. And this particular PDA came out far ahead of all of the others because the people said, it feels kind of more familiar or Chinese. And part of the reason was that it was built on Chinese social theory of relationship building. And so the organization of the entire user interface was not in functions and folders and applications as we normally think of computer structures, but in terms of knowledge, people, and relationship building. And all of the content available was reorganized to be much more appropriate for how Chinese people in general develop guangxi, which is long-term relationship building, if I'm using the term correctly,
sure.
pronouncing it anywhere near correctly.
It's very accurate, I think.
And that shows the power of trying to develop something which is more suited for a particular culture that has underlying very different social organization and long different cultural history. Yes?
So there's been a lot of discussion about kind of color theory and meanings of color and imagery and a lot of visual aspects. But there hasn't been a lot of discussion in this about kind of some of the mechanical aspects of design, information.
Mechanical?
Yeah, like information architecture, navigation.
Totally.
So my question would be, have you seen a lot of variation across cultures on like how information architecture, navigation works? And could you recommend any resources where we could go to find information about that?
I just want to mention that this Wukong project is really about mental models and navigation paradigms that were completely different and according to their research, better suited to a Chinese market. I have not been able to convince the people involved with the project to publish anything yet about this. It's also the case that back in '99, there were two Kodak researchers who did studies of product for camera design in China, Japan, India, and North America. And they have published some of their work, but most of it was not released out of Kodak, obviously, for obvious reasons. And there are studies of information architecture, mental model, and navigation differences that have been published in the IWIPS conference proceedings, if you know that, International Workshop on Internationalization of Products and Services, IWIPS. If you do a search for that, you'll find these conferences that have been running since '99 when I first met you. And they have a lot of quite fascinating studies of even differences in China among different bank websites and the language they use and the organization of content, etc.
I think, well, go
No,
ahead.
please.
I was just going to say, just as an interesting tidbit, Zenzui is a new company that launched, and it's a tile-based interface. It came from Datelens, which was something that Dr. Ben Betterson at University of Maryland invented, which was a zooming interface that always puts you in context. And it's not cross-cultural, but it's cross-platform, and it's cross-usage, and it's visual. And so there are a lot of really innovative new ways of gathering and seeking information that can be used on a small screen, to a large screen, to a TV. And so more and more we're getting into multi-usage, and I think scalability and viability of object-oriented interface design, thinking about tasks and objects, and that's really what we're seeing changing the most. And it can apply then dynamically to different cultures according to how that culture is organized.
Cross-cultural differences in taxonomy are, a bear to deal with, but primarily the trends that I'm seeing is they're moving more towards relationships as opposed to...
More towards what?
Relationships.
Like
I mean, this is something that keeps coming up. I mean, I think Flickr is a good example, if only because they kind of stumbled upon that a few years ago, the whole, this is your stuff, this is other people's stuff, this is the wider world. And it seems fairly straightforward, but their adoption in Saudi and in China and pretty much universally has spiked completely, because it's not about, I'm putting out a gallery of photography and you're going to be invited into it and it just sits here. It's a distribution, and it's the way, two pieces work together and the way people work together in those relationships. I keep seeing this over and over again. I don't know, I don't rely on any white papers or anything for that kind of stuff. It's more about looking out for good examples of how people are structuring taxonomies for products that are succeeding internationally, and being able to figure out what's appropriate for the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and having key calls to action that are universal, looking at websites in Iceland and also trying to book a plane ticket or something in a different country where
Right.
it's not an English option. It's always a very interesting usability experience for me. And doing a heuristic evaluation or trying to help people do usability studies in different countries, we are finding similarities in visual calls to action and making sure that there's still primary actions that are supposed to be taken. The Chinese website is a little different than that, because you really have to be reading everything.
Right.
So I don't know if it's cross-cultural in that way, but it's a very interesting adventure to look at all the different websites that are available in different countries and see if you can still figure out what the primary action is or what they're trying to sell you in that way, if they're selling something
Actually,
or a service.
that piece of abstraction is actually really good. If you can take a look at international sites that are written in languages other than English that you don't speak, when I lived in Tokyo, my Japanese reading and writing ability was really, really poor. But what I noticed was when I was trying to look at sites for examples, putting up a color board or just themes for the designs that we were trying to do, it was funny the way you could sink in almost immediately which pieces you needed to be attenuating to.
Because of design patterns.
Exactly. And not that these things are universal or truly cross-cultural, but there are only so, if you're dealing with screens, there's only so much real estate that can be used and abused. And there's only so many choices that can be made. It's figuring out what are the common denominators.
If they work for Americans, they work for everybody.
Exactly.
So I want to add to what you talked about relationships. That's so important. When we talk about information structures, what navigation, all that, you're exposing, right? Some capability that's, a layer below, right? And those relationships are really important. One example, a practical example again to look at it from sort of a software point of view. We've learned a ton about calendaring systems around the world as we're doing Outlook and stuff, right? It's very different because calendaring systems often tell you about relationships within organizations, right? Default in North American organizations is people are able to see each other's calendars, right? When people are busy. The default in most Asian calendaring is it's hierarchical, so you cannot see your boss's calendar when the boss is busy and not busy, right? So there's some, Aaron talked about power distance, right? Power distance, relationship. And then there's a level below, which actually, how do you expose that, right? Those preferences of power and relationships, right? And then there's some universals then about, the fact that we all have the same seeing apparatus and sort of the same apparatus for making selections, target sizes and how you move the mouse and so on. They tend to fall into place, but there is actually the level below is where you find the variance.
It reminds me, we consulted with a Finnish company, Teamware, to Americanize their user interface as they introduced it into the U.S. for collaborative software. And they clearly were a socialist, collectivist culture that didn't fit into the U.S. And IBM's Lotus 123 was Lotus Notes rather was more successful, even though this other software had much more power. It was sort of more elegant in a way. It just wasn't well suited to our business communities and the way we operate. And multiply that many times over in many different directions, you get a sense for the powerful effect, the potential ROI, and the complexities of thinking about culture. We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Paulo Fernandes. I come from Portugal, Europe. I have a company called Multivector, which develops software for real estate. And my question is, in your experience, the constraints that we have nowadays about going abroad are the same that 10 years ago we had, and in the next 10 years what they will be, because in the past information was more local, now it's global. Now we have tools that are used globally, like Google, like Office, like Windows. Does these tools make of us more likely in the future?
I actually talk a lot about this because I talk about tools for collaboration amongst teams, especially distributed teams that are all across the world. We were talking about Lotus a second ago. I'm a big fan of, instead of using a centralized, very top-down kind of organizational software or enterprise level stuff, I like small combinations of tools, and those tools are coming from all over the world now. I mean, there's probably one of the things I use online is Doppler right now. It's in beta. It's for coordinating. You're going to be it's coordinating presence. I spend a lot of time thinking about presence and travel and these kinds of things. I'm kind of a small segmentation of that market, but Doppler and pieces like it are coming from Europe. Pieces are coming from India. People are starting to use those tools which are more appropriate to the specific needs that they have. I think the American dominance, at least in web products, is going to be from 10 years from now, is going to be seen as a very short-lived thing, because I think development communities around the world are understanding how to capture a market using really good usable and utilitarian software, and being able to figure out that small piece that they need to nail in order to make it an appeal to a huge wide audience of users.
Someone at lunch brought up a really interesting thing. It was the language of technology, and it was really a great conversation about how XML may be one of the multicultural universal languages that will, we talked about sustainable technology, and you asked about 10 years from now, and I think it's talking about platform again and understanding technologies that we need to use that are, again, standards-based. That's why open is so important in a lot of ways. Open thinking is one thing, but open technologies is another, and XML is a tiny example of ways to parse out and make information object-oriented, and so that it will translate and modify and shift and change as you go forward 10 years. And sustainable technology is a big topic that I talk about, but it's a whole other session.
I think it's a great question. In fact, I think you're asking about, we've had to deal with a bunch of different cultures and accommodating our products, really, our offerings to customers who've got different cultural habits. I mean, more and more, is there going to be one big monoculture, and do you design the one product? I think there's two sides to that, right? Yes, there's a certain aspect of monoculturalization that we do see happening across as we use the same software, eat similar foods, and do all those kinds of same things. But there's also a very interesting flip side of that, which is there's the growth of subcultures, right? These may not be geographically divided anymore, right? So we have, and observing the young, good folk is great. I mean, it is, there is a subculture of manga comics, and there's a whole communities that have adopted facets of, say, Japanese culture within North America, and they've taken other parts of European culture. And so other kinds of subcultures are forming, and they're still your customer base, right? They may not have the kind of obvious differences of language and some sort of traditionally driven, religiously driven kind of cultural differences.
More
right?
generation.
Yeah, they will, and
Yes.
these are different. And some of the, again, there is the game's changing, and how you appeal to these customers and be able to provide for these customers, right? But I think that is something that it's going to be really exciting as we alert to observe what those are. And I think, again, it's so young, we don't have ways to frame these questions well. But that is there. I don't think that sort of it becomes one flat monoculture. Right? There's still differentiation.
The stronger the monoculture, I think, the more it inspires the birth of just absolutely bizarre, unexpected. I mean, Morrissey listeners in Mexico City. I mean, huge subculture down there. I mean, it's just one of those things you would never, ever anticipate. And I love stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, our time.
Oh, it's time.
Disappeared.
An excellent question.
Obrigado.
Excellent comments from all of you. Both the speakers and you are simply amazing. I'd like to thank you for your patience and interest in spending some time with us. I'm sure that all of the panelists here will be available for a few minutes afterwards. If you would like to get some white papers on culture dimensions and a bibliography on culture and UI design, throw your email address or a card in here, and I promise to send you something. In the meantime, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
I hope
And
this
for
is the
staying
start
awake
of
after
an
lunch.
ongoing conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely.
folks.
Always
Great
great.
conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.